Stats Canada just released their latest inflation figures, and yes, inflation is still running high. And freezing prices on no-name products, well, that's a whole lot of nothing. The Consumer Price Index was up 6.9% in September, and for those keeping track at home, last month that figure was 7 on the dot. But that's the overall CPI figure, and it doesn't tell the whole story. For example, just food cost alone, that was up 11.4%. In housing, that was up 6.3%. For the average household income, food and shelter alone take up 45% of the overall consumption. As a result, the Bank of Canada continues to raise interest rates aggressively and will likely continue to do so into 2023 as well. Inflation doesn't stop at just food and housing prices. You also have to factor in excess labor. And as of right now, according to Stats Canada, there are 1 million unfulfilled jobs around right now. So that means inflation will continue to stick around. But Canada is not alone when it comes to inflationary pressures. Take a look at this chart. It shows that developed countries like Australia, the UK, United States, and Canada included are seeing inflation rates between 6 and 10%. Meanwhile, countries like China, Japan, and Taiwan, they're around the 2.8% mark. Now you'll be wondering, well, how can these three countries have inflation rates less than 3%, while developed countries such as Canada, Australia, US, etc., are more than double or triple that of these three countries? Well, what's really interesting is that according to the notes from the Financial Post, they found that countries that had more spending in 2020 because of COVID also saw a correlation to higher inflation rates in 2022. Well, that kind of makes sense. The countries that did the most amount of cheap money printing, gave out money like it was water, they're now facing a lot of inflation pressures. And the countries that were a little bit more restrictive in terms of giving out just free cash to everybody, they're a little bit better when it comes to inflationary rates. Meaning today, we have to pay the price of all those government subsidies, all that easy money printing, all that cheap debt, and everything in between. We're now having to foot the bill for all the money printing parties we saw in the last 2 years. That excessive spending, it's putting the hurt on today. Inflation hurts, and so does higher interest rates. The central bank, they have a mandate to maintain low and stable inflation, and they've been fighting this high inflation that we've been seeing by raising interest rates. Since March, they have raised their interest rates 6 times so far this year, considering we were at an all-time low rate of 0.5% just back in February. These interest rate hikes that we're seeing are feeding into the borrowing costs that Canadians have to pay, that businesses have to pay. And yes, some might say that it is justified because everybody was taking on cheap debt to fund whatever. Now, we're just getting the bill for that. So what is the Bank of Canada trying to do? Well, they're trying to slow spending by discouraging people to borrow less by raising those interest rates because you have to pay more interest. They're doing this because they're trying to bring inflation back to their target neutral range of around 2%. And reaching this goal will take time. The consensus is that after you raise interest rates, the full impact isn't seen of those interest rate hikes until a year or two after that raise. Now, having said that, the impact of these higher interest rates is definitely being felt in the housing market, which has been cooling since prices peaked in February. But when it comes to inflation in general, the real problem is that prices are still rising faster than wages, and that's why households are feeling the squeeze, because everything costs more than the income you can bring in. And you'll be wondering, well, how did we even end up here? Things weren't that bad a year or two ago when it comes to buying groceries. Well, let me give you a quick refresher on how we ended up in this situation. At the start of the pandemic, consumers like you and I, because of all the lockdowns and restrictions in place, we had really nowhere to spend except for, those ad hoc food deliveries. So all the things we would have spent on like entertainment and travel, that cash was then saved. And when these restrictions eased up and things started opening up again, well, consumers, what do? Well, they started spending more again because they had all this cash that had just been piled up, and people were now itchy saying, I want to go and travel, I want to go to a concert, I want to go out and get experiences because of 2 years in lockdown. Companies, however, they just could not keep up with this increase in demand. Especially many of them had to reduce production, had to reduce their services because of the lockdowns, because of restrictions. Another way to think about this as an on and off switch. Much easier for consumers to either turn on their spending or turn off their spending when you're restricted. But for companies, it takes time to ramp up production. It takes time to ramp down production. As you can see, there was a mismatch between companies starting to ramp up production and consumers just wanting everything right now. Not to mention, there were shipping delays. There are still shipping delays. There are still shortages in labor and definitely in key inputs that drive products and services. Now, if you take all that together, what does that lead to? Higher prices for goods and services that you don't have to pay for because there's more demand, less supply. That creates upward pressure on pricing. While prices have generally gone up across the board, the biggest areas that we're seeing the most price increases are gas, shelter, and food. And I'm sure you've seen that when you get those receipts when you're filling up your tank or at the grocery store or just paying rent or mortgages. And these three key areas are the three major categories that actually make up the Consumer Price Index or the CPI. So when you hear that the CPI has gone up 6.9%, well, now you have a little bit more context that bulk of that comes from food, shelter, and gas. So we're paying more for these three categories than we were a year ago. So that's why it's gone up. That's where these metrics come from. Now, if you take a look at your Facebook feed, your Instagram feed, or any other social media feed, you'll likely notice that consumers were paying more for goods during the pandemic because you couldn't go out and really spend on anything else. So people decided to buy material things. But now, people have shifted their focus. People have shifted their focus on spending, and they're now spending more on experiences, more on services, more on entertainment. And that's why now you're probably seeing all these travel photos on Facebook, all these concert photos on Instagram, because people want experiences that they simply couldn't have during the last 2 years. And what is the number one key input for all these services? Labor. In other words, a tight labor market has increased the cost of labor, which in turn increases the cost of services that you now have to pay for. So that's on services, and services is generally optional. You don't need entertainment, you don't need travel. If you have the money, sure, go for it. But what really worries me is one of the most basic necessities when it comes to inflation, and that's food. Food is something we all need, and this level of food inflation is having a major impact on Canadian household budgets. As you can likely tell by now that trying to explain inflation, there's not just one single cause, more so a series of causes. And some of the other causes that I haven't really talked about are, well, if you haven't looked at the exchange rate for US to Canadian dollars, take a quick look. Our Canadian dollar has lost a ton of ground to the US dollar, so we have a weaker exchange rate. We have higher transportation costs, higher commodity prices, and all these higher costs get passed along to us, the consumer, when we buy goods and services. And all this doesn't happen immediately. It takes time. But when it happens, you will notice it. And when you notice it, that's when it sometimes feels like it just happened immediately. The fact that the loonie has been plunging against the US dollar, well, that makes all imports more expensive, and food is no exception. Here's a fun fact. Loblaws, which is a major grocery retailer across Canada, reported in its Q3 earnings that profits rose to $387 million, up from $375 million just a year ago. Metro, another big name when it comes to household groceries, they reported $275 million of profit, which is a 9% increase compared to just a year ago. Grocery stores are making a ton of cash, they're making a ton of profit, and they're trying to pass along inflation as one of the costs to increase their prices. The cost of living is going up, and thanks to inflation, which is around 7%, you're feeling the pinch. Honestly, every time I go to the grocery store or make any other everyday purchase, I look at the receipt and I'm still shocked of how much I'm paying for a basket of such few things and how much more I'm having to pay for this every time I go shop. So what I want to try for the next part of this video is I want to give you some useful tips. More than that, I want to give you real actionable steps that you can take right after this video to actually save money, to actually fight inflation. Because if I said something like, well, the best way to fight inflation is that go back and live with your parents, don't buy anything, don't eat anything, you know what, don't even breathe, and save 100% of your dollars, so that way you come out in 18 months rich and with a lot of money. That's not going to help anybody. Right now, we're in the middle of Q4, and companies will fight tooth and nail for your business, either through retention plans or acquisition promos. Now, these companies, they make a ton of cash, and now's the time to make them work hard for your business. Make them work hard for the dollars that you work hard to bring in. The examples I'm about to share, these are the real things that I've done to try to save on my expenses, to try to cut back on my spending. And I want to pass these items or these tips along so you can benefit. I also want you to leave your tips or things that you've done to fight inflation in the comment section down below. By sharing what you've done, by sharing your experiences, we can all benefit from one another to really fight inflation. Because trust me when I say this, every single dollar that you don't spend is a dollar earned, and every dollar adds up. Especially in times right now, you will notice every single dollar. The first thing I did earlier this year was simply switch internet providers. The marketplace, yes, it is cornered by the big three, TELUS, Bell, and Rogers. At the surface level, they all offer the same plans for roughly the same pricing. The easiest and quickest way to save money on your internet bill is to switch to a wholesaler. They will still provide you access to either the Bell or Rogers network, but based on your location, this will come at a much cheaper rate. And a lot of people don't know this, that you can still access the Rogers or Bell network since they're pretty much the two main networks in Canada. You can access these exact same networks through a wholesaler at a much cheaper rate. Same service, same network, different provider. So switching internet providers for me, it's not an easy thing because, well, the internet is what I use to make these videos. It's what I use to run my YouTube content, because without internet or without good internet, I can't make videos. Or I could make videos, but I just can't upload them to YouTube. So that kind of sucks. So what did I end up doing? I switched my internet to a startup called Oxio. For example, taking a look at this 150 megabytes plan as an example, Bell and Rogers, they'll charge you roughly $95. But with Oxio, you get double the speed at 300 megabits per second for $79. Now keep in mind, these prices are based on your local area, but the concept is find a reputable wholesaler in your area, find those savings, and if you want even more savings, there's an exclusive link to Oxio in the description of this video. If you sign up with them using that link, you get your first month of internet for free. Let's say you spend an hour switching your internet provider, and using the figures we just talked about, that's easily $300 in annual savings. And why an hour? Well, that's how long it took me from making that first call until I was back up and running with Oxio. So it doesn't take a whole lot of effort. I just did it a couple months ago. Trust me, that effort is worth the dollars you can save. Another thing you can do is if you send your money back home, and that back home may be India, maybe Pakistan, maybe Bangladesh, wherever it may be. If you're using the big banks, or if you're using Western Union to send money back home, you're likely paying a lot in fees. What I did was I switched to Wise, and it's just so much easier to send money overseas, all from the comfort of my own home, using my laptop with just a few clicks. And don't just take my word for it. I want you to do comparison shopping, find out how much it'll actually cost you. Maybe it turns out that Western Union, yes, they are in fact cheaper, but the point is companies want your business. You have nothing to lose by shopping around. And as a bonus, if you want to try out Wise, send money overseas, you can use the link in the description of this video and send up to $800 with no fees. So give them a shot. If you're using the big banks to invest your money, whether that's on stocks, ETFs, or mutual funds, you're likely paying way too much on commission trades. What can you do? You can switch to something like Wealthsimple or Questrade, or at least even do comparison shopping against the big banks. Insurance, that's another big major monthly spend in your budget. Shop around, that's the whole point. Especially if you've been with the same provider for many years. You have nothing to lose, just call them. Just pick up the phone and call your provider saying, hey, I've been with you for X number of years. Do you have any promos? Is there any discounts I can get? And if they just refuse, well, then that's when you can start comparison shopping. Shop around. And if you want an alternative to all these big insurance providers, you can check out PolicyMe. And I'll leave a link to PolicyMe. They're one of the cheaper options in Canada when it comes to insurance policies. I'll leave a link to them in the description below. This is another easy one. Your phone plan. We're in the middle of Q4. You need to shop for your phone plan if you've been with the same provider, if you've been with the same plan for many years. If you're with Bell, you call Rogers, you call TELUS, see what they're offering. If you're with TELUS, you call Rogers, you call Bell, see what they're offering. Get them to compete against one another. And if you don't want either of those three, well, then you can try Freedom Mobile. If you use the link in the description below, you can get a $25 service credit on top of whatever other savings you're able to negotiate. The point is, whatever you're spending on goods and services, I want you to shop around. And Q4 is the best time to do so to get some amazing deals. Why? Because companies have aggressive sales quotas that they're trying to fill to hit their annual target. They will be super aggressive to shore up new businesses or simply to retain existing customers. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you had some meaningful takeaways from this video. Make sure you hit that like, subscribe, and thanks button. Everything I've talked about, all those amazing deals, those sign-up bonuses, those offers, I will leave links to everything in the description below. Your business is up for grabs, so take advantage in Q4 comparison shop. That's it for now. I'll talk to you in the comment section.